Okay, today I'm going to talk about plant communication. What is it? What it could mean for you and your herbal learning, and why it's part of the answer to the current gap that I see in the herbal learning that's going on. So when I put my finger on the pulse of the big wide world of herbal studies, there are a few big frustrations that I hear about over and over again. People tell me they feel overwhelmed, overloaded with information that doesn't connect, and they feel distracted from being able to follow through or settle into a useful routine with their home herbal studies. Or another big frustration, maybe you feel like your herbal learning isn't as integrated into your lifestyle as much as you would like it to be. That's a big one. And so as an herbal educator, I'm not only interested in teaching the remedies and the techniques of herbalism, but I've always had a focus on trying to crack the code on the roadblocks and the difficulties that come with studying herbs. And just this past week, I've received emails. If you write to me, I read everything that comes my way. So here we go. Here's a couple things that have come my way this past week. I have an entire cupboard of herbs and supplements that I don't completely understand and don't follow through in using. Here's another one. There's so much to learn. Memorizing it all keeps my head spinning. My head feels clogged with data, and I feel scattered in my herbal learning. I'm already overloaded with the demands of daily life, and I'm falling short on learning everything that there is to do to keep my family well. So those aren't very good feelings, right? I mean, people tell me these things, and what I want to do is I want to go to bat with this whole overwhelm thing and why direct plant communication is such a big player when it comes to this issue. So would you like to know my tried and true approach for dealing with overwhelm, distraction, follow through, burnout, and feeling like you don't ever know enough? I can't tell you how many people have told me that they have this kind of low-grade nagging feeling that they just don't know enough. So here's how I deal with that. Relationship. Not just, hey, how you doing kind of relationship, but the deep, you hear the frog? The deep kind of relationship where you really connect. I'm talking about deep connected relationship and communication with the plant. So in this video, I'm going to dissect some of the components that go into plant communication and define what it is. What exactly is plant communication? And why, if it isn't part of your herbal studies, everything is going to be, well, it's just going to be harder and take a little longer, and how plant communication actually accelerates your herbal learning. So the problem is there's been kind of an unfortunate trend in our education that applies to our herbal education as well. And I recognize the problem with this in my own herbal journey. In my early years of studying herbs, I remembered my brain just like burning, trying to memorize everything. I wondered how people ever, organized or, connected the dots and made sense of everything. And I figured I was doing something wrong. Or I even remember having the feeling like maybe I got too late of a start on this, and maybe I just don't have what it takes. I had those feelings. And so what I'd like to do is share what helped me overcome my obstacles to overwhelm and to help you feel more relaxed, secure, integrated with your herbal studies. So the problem is that when we focus on using only the intellect with our herbal studies, without a doubt, the information is harder to retain, it's more difficult to remember, and to be truthful, we end up just not being as effective as we can be with our herbal remedies. So here's the thing. When you establish deep plant communication and relationships first, everything changes in your herbal studies. It's like creating a nice cushy bed for everything else to land in. The clinical studies, the constituents, the specific uses, the properties and functions, the take this for that, it all has a place to land, right? A foundation to organize around. It gives you direction, a context that ties everything together and is personal to you. So when you limit your herbal studies to only learning from books and classes and don't fully open the door to learning directly from the plants about how they can help you, then the bottom line is you basically don't access the full potential of the healing power of the plants. So even if you don't quite understand what deep plant communication is yet, let me start by telling you that by accessing your innate human capacity to perceive, understand, and implement direct communication from the plants, you will improve your retention rate, focus, follow through, and confidence in working with your herbal medicines. So what is plant communication? What is it exactly? I'm going to spend the rest of this video talking about some of what I experience as the core components of plant communication, on how to think about it, how it can bridge the gap in herbal learning, so that you can feel nourished and rejuvenated in your herbal studies instead of overwhelmed. Your herbal learning should not feel overwhelming. So even if you think, not sure if this is for me, stick with me for a bit, okay? It's not that I know everything about this, because I don't, but I've studied with more than 20 different teachers in learning multiple layers of techniques that help me open the pathways to direct plant communication. And I started studying these techniques at the very beginning of my herbal studies, because I found that it made my herbal studies easier and more fun. So I've had lots of questions about just exactly what is plant communication and deep plant relationship. So let's get to it. What are the basics? What goes into it? So plant communication, it's like any other kind of relationship. It's alive. It's always changing. But to get started in this conversation of understanding what it is, let's break it down into 4 simple areas to help our understanding of it. So number 1, how do the plants communicate? Okay, there's lots of studies now showing plants are always communicating, relating, perceiving, and responding to their environment. They release chemicals into the air, send messages into the soil. When a plant nearby is being damaged by an insect, the other plants change their chemical makeup to try and defend themselves from what happened to a neighboring plant, right? They send warnings. Plants can sense one another's biochemical messages. We know that they are communicating. Just because we haven't been taught how to listen just means we're not awake yet to what's possible. And the plants are living. They're living beings. They're constantly emitting clues and information. And again, just because we don't understand their messages and how to decode it doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? So think about what we know about the actual plant constituents. We only know of like maybe 20% of what they're made of, the actual constituents. What's in the other 80%? We haven't proven yet. In general, we've underestimated what's possible, and as we expand our awareness, we find that interspecies communication is possible. So plants are elemental beings. They're made of air, water, fire, earth, and we are made of air, water, fire, earth. And the plants are always communicating through those elemental channels of air, water, fire, earth, right? And we're made up of the same elements as the plants, right? And so why is it that you have plants with traditional uses that are very similar in different parts of the world? Before the internet, before the telephone, people interpreted messages of the plants and came up with the same uses of the same plants without talking to each other. We know plants are communicating. How do we perceive communication from other living beings that are made of the same elements that we are? What do you look for so that communication becomes plain, even obvious, right? So that leads us to the second thing to think about when we talk about what is plant communication. How do I listen? How do I expand my awareness of the plants? How do I perceive them? What are the channels of perception? What's the process of activating those channels? And how do I set myself up so how do I set myself up to perceive, okay? So there's the plant itself. We know it's communicating. We know it's emitting information. And then there's you, there's us. How do we clear the cobwebs and open the door to remembering our innate capacity to perceive our environment, including herbs and spices? So someone recently said to me, please help me understand this and tell me, please tell me. I don't have to do some weird spiritual experiment. No, you don't have to be a spiritual guru. You don't have to have any kind of special gift. This is not like esoteric, I'm talking about basic skills that are inherent to our human function. We just don't nourish them in this culture. And that question reminds me of one of my students, Karen. And what happened was she saw other people having experiences with the plants, but she just thought it wasn't for her. And after doing some really basic plant communication exercises with me, she was so excited to feel the doorway to plant communication open to her. And now she says that it is what is at the core of her ability to use herbs successfully for her and her family. So it's at the core of what she does. And everything else in her home herbalism stacks on top of that, okay? So there are specific techniques to help deepen our seeing, our listening, our feeling, our knowing, basically open the lines of communication, awaken these channels of perception so we can learn directly from the plants. So the plants themselves can become our teachers, right? I mean, we are highly sensitive creatures. We just have to put our antennas back out. Our antennas are asleep. Everything is provided for us now. We're at the top of the food chain. I mean, sheesh, the most alert state is reserved for driving, right? Our deep awareness capacities and sensory perceptions, they're numbed out. And I've trained more than 1,000 of my students in how to activate the basic human skill of direct nature perception. And many of them were skeptical. Many of them were thinking, I've heard of that. That doesn't happen with me. That's not how I roll. But you see, you're here. You're here because your ancestors survived. And they survived because they were highly attuned to perceiving their environment and made choices based on those perceptions and the communication they received from their environment. So once we clear a few obstacles out of the way, we remember our antennas, and slowly we can start to navigate how it works for each one of us to be receptive to the information. How do you hear? How do you see, intuit, have insight? How do you activate your own unique way of asking for guidance from the plants? And how can you tell if a plant's really communicating with you and you're not just making stuff up, right? So there are daily techniques and simple practices that can build your confidence in your interaction and perceptions, and you can set yourself up to hear and learn to trust your inner voice, right? It's kind of like the more you do it, the more you grease the pathway, the more it happens, right? And I'll tell you, there's nothing new about this. We just don't learn this in school. We are a culture focused on using the intellect, and we've forgotten the breadth and depth of our human capacities and perceptive abilities. So we got to turn on the faucet, okay? Okay, so the plants communicate. We can activate our ability to listen and perceive, and we are wired for that. And once you open the lines of communication, the next thing is, number 3, is how do you interpret what you get? Okay, so when my students are starting out on this, just getting their faucets turned on, the big question is, how do I decipher what the plant is telling me? How do I learn how to trust myself and the plants? And I have to say, the cool thing about this aspect of herbal learning is you don't need more supplies. You don't have to have more cupboard or counter space, and you don't need another book. You don't have to buy anything. It's already in you, right? So again, the third thing to think about in this structure I'm kind of laying out on how to think about plant communication is translation. How do you translate what you perceive? Are messages clear and understandable? How can you trust what comes through? How do you know when you've misunderstood? How do you know you're not just making it up? It's not just in your head, that it's real or accurate, right? How do you know if you're correct in your deciphering? And how do you trust what the plants are saying, right? So we perceive, we interpret, and then we apply. How do you apply what you've received? What's the practical application of what is being taught? How do you crack the code on applying it in your real life? And what are the guidelines of interpreting what you get so that you can be safe and responsible with your translation? And how does this fit into your herbal studies? How do you apply it to your daily life? So those are the four kind of areas that we think about with plant communication. The plants are communicating. How do we listen? How do we perceive? And how do we translate what we perceive? Right? And then how do we apply it? And when you've got deep plant communication at the heart of your herbal studies, you don't have to rely on memorization. You've got an embodied experiential relationship that provides a container for the facts to stick. So I hope this helped put a framework around this. I got lots of questions about what is plant communication. So I shot this video to help kind of give a perspective, a way to think about it. And I also wanted to let you know that I'm really excited about my course that's opening for enrollment soon. It's called Plant Wisdom, Activate Your Plant Communication Skills. And you can actually put your name in somewhere on this page, I think it's below, and get on the list to be the first and be notified when I open up enrollment for this new course. And we are going to do a deep dive into everything I've talked about today. And I'm excited, and I hope that this helped answer some of the questions that have been rolling around about plant communication. So talk to you soon.